Hello, I'm Debbie Georgatos, and I am very happy to be interviewing today a gentleman who is running for the Texas State House. We have joining me today in this interview Samuel Smith. He's running for Texas State House, House District 107. And this is a seat currently held by a Democrat. There is a great energy in the Republican side wanting to hold on to the majority in the Texas State House and even increase the Republican majority. So I'm giving all of us a chance to meet the Republican candidate who won the primary. So the Republican candidate for Texas House District 107, Samuel Smith. Hello, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Debbie.
So glad you could do this today. And I want to jump right in and just I basically want to talk about who you are, what your life background is, and then the differences between what you would do representing your district 107 in the Texas State Legislature as compared with the incumbent. So let's just start with this. I read in preparation for today, I read your bio, a bit more about your background. You had a really unique upbringing. So I wanted to start with, please tell our listeners about your kind of life story, your upbringing.
Sure. Thanks. So I was born in East Dallas. My father was a professor at Southern Methodist University. He taught civil and environmental engineering. And then actually later on, it's funny, we're talking to the Park Cities Republican women because later on, we eventually moved to the Park Cities area to be closer to the campus. And then in 1998, we moved to Cairo, Egypt, where my father was a professor of civil environmental engineering at the American University in Cairo. And so I spent my second half of my childhood overseas. And while I was there, had an incredible opportunity. We lived in a very diverse neighborhood with people from all over the world. I was homeschooled. We got to minister to refugees from Sudan. I got to teach a mathematics class for a Sudanese refugee school. We got to minister to an Egyptian orphanage. Obviously, got to know a lot of my dad's students, and we viewed that as a ministry opportunity as well. And he worked with an Egyptian pastor in Christian ministry as well. We also got to travel all over the world because with his research as an environmental engineering professor specializing in water treatment, he traveled to conferences all over the world, and he'd take us along with him. So I got to go to just about every continent in the world and meet people from all over. So it was an incredibly privileged upbringing. I was over there during 9/11, and so that coupled with the fact that my family, both my grandfathers, and I have uncles and cousins, et cetera, who all served in the military and spoke very highly of it. So that all combined motivated me to join the military, and I had a great appreciation for the liberties I enjoy as an American growing up in a third world Muslim majority country like Egypt. Motivated me to join the military. And so Senator Cornyn was kind enough to nominate me to West Point, and I attended there, double majored in civil engineering and mathematics, and then served as an engineer and an counterintelligence officer for 5 years. I branched engineers, but they had me do some other work there as well. And had the opportunity to deploy to Liberia, which I considered fortunate. I had 2 deployments to Afghanistan that were canceled for various reasons. But one of the reasons was going to Liberia because they had a need for civil engineer officers there to oversee the construction of some Ebola treatment units. Oh. And that was a real experience because even, growing up in Egypt is certainly a lower income country, but Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. And they really got hit hard by the Ebola outbreak. Which makes what we're going through now look like nothing. I mean, I remember driving through villages where there were dead people lining the streets. I mean, it was terrible. It was a really tough time. But for me, it was a great learning experience and an opportunity to be exposed to yet another culture and group of people.
Wow. I was going to say that whole idea of growing up, a portion of your growing up life in Cairo, Egypt, traveling with your dad as he went to other places, it had to make you appreciate America more and the unique greatness of America. Did you feel that way?
Absolutely. I had friends who were Christians and they were treated like, second-class citizens over there for sure. And obviously the flip side of that, it gives me an appreciation for being a religious minority, and even in the case of Egypt, growing up over there, an ethnic minority. And so, I have Muslim neighbors here now that I'm good friends with, and it hurts me to see. Obviously, I'm a Christian and I believe in what I believe, but it also hurts me to see that sometimes Muslims who are very good people get lumped in with Islamic terrorism, which is obviously a very big problem and is a part of it is a religious sect within Islam. But but anyway, it just gives me, I think, a more balanced and broader perspective on the world.
It just has to. Plus, I want to thank you for your military service. I mean, West Point military service, your education and mathematics. I mean, you're really quite a well-rounded young man to be launching off into service in the Texas State House. So I want to ask you, before we get into how you see yourself as differently from the person personally holding that office, why did you decide to run for Texas State House?
Sure. Well, a little bit of backstory. So obviously we had our first, I got married and had my first child while in the military. And then we moved back here and we live in Mesquite now. And we've had twin daughters since then. And I worked in land development for a while as a civil engineer here in the DFW area. And then I had the opportunity to jump over and use my applied math side and start my own investment research modeling business where I do consulting modeling work for investment research companies. So that gave me some flexibility. As far as to being even able to run. But running for office was not something that was on my radar really until last July, where I had the opportunity to attend a training for veterans who were interested. I mean, I was involved politically with volunteering and working with some groups, but it was a training for veterans who were interested in being involved in politics. So I thought, give it a shot. And a couple former state reps at that event encouraged me afterward to look into running for office, and particularly state rep. So I looked into the district. I obviously knew who our incumbent was. I'd followed previous campaigns, but wanted to see if there was anyone more qualified than me or already very well organized, ready to run on the Republican side. And there wasn't anyone. It turned out there was no one else. I was unchallenged in the primary, so there was a need. And I do believe that our state rep that we currently have, she's done some good things, but on the whole, I believe her philosophy of government, the role of government, as well as some of her voting record and even her personal character, I think falls short of what we need at this time. And I believe I can add some value given my unique background and my worldview.
So before we get into contrasting the two of you, one other thing I wanted to ask you just basically about being Republican. It's surprising how many people give you, if you say why you're Republican versus Democrat, for some people, it's a one issue thing. It's because of this issue and that's what drives me. For other people, it's more of a political philosophy, a broader sense. So why are you Republican?
Yeah, and again, actually one of my campaign slogans is principle over party, people over politics. And so obviously, personally, I don't dwell too much on the partisanship thing. I look at the individual candidate, and obviously I'm the Republican nominee. And so, I do generally way more closely aligned with the Republican Party platform than the Democratic Party platform, obviously. But I really like to focus on the issues. And so in particular, at this point, I think the big things for me are fiscal responsibility. The Republican Party, although they have a mixed record on this, in terms of platform, Republicans are committed to fiscal responsibility, limiting government spending to what the government is constitutionally supposed to do. And even in that point, obviously doing it well, but being as thrifty as possible and doing so, realizing that it's taxpayer money that they're spending. Whereas the Democratic Party, generally in terms of their platform and in practice, they try to expand the role of government outside of its constitutional bounds. And they also tend to spend a lot on these programs. These programs tend to cost more than they're even advertised to cost. I'd say that's the biggest reason I'm a Republican. And then the second point is, this is not necessarily historically for the Democratic Party, but recently they have moved increasingly away from anything connected to a biblical worldview. I'm a Christian, and so while I understand that we as a country give sanction to and welcome people of all faiths, I do believe that as a Christian, I can't, God has a design for government and that it can't violate that. And so as a Christian, I can't legislate in a way that would violate my Christian viewpoint. So in particular areas like life, I believe that life begins in the womb and that it's sacred and that government's role is to protect human life at all stages. The Democratic Party and my opponent in particular are very opposed to that concept, and they believe that the government should not protect life in the womb.
Okay, and so this is interesting. There are so many issues facing Texas, but I want to start with just the premise where we are right now. We're going to have a tough legislative session coming up. people anticipate, because the whole country's been through, Texas has been through this coronavirus. There's excessive spending going on to deal with that challenge. So do you agree, or do you see that this upcoming legislative session is likely to have more of a challenge even than the last one in terms of handling fiscal and holding reining in being fiscally responsible, reining in spending?
Absolutely, and especially when you look at Texas's economy is closely aligned with the oil sector, and the price of oil has taken a huge hit. It's recovered some, but not enough. And so between that and just the overall slowdown in economic activity, local governments are going to be hurting. The state government's going to be hurting, especially through sales tax revenues. We'll see what happens with property tax appraisals, but I can't imagine it's going to be helping to drive up the cost of the value of land and housing. And so property taxes are going to be squeezed too, which I personally don't think is a bad thing. But yes, certainly revenue is going to be tight, and we're going to have to make tough choices as far as how we're going to prioritize that.
So the top issues you see facing Texas in this upcoming legislative session are certainly the fiscal issues you just mentioned.
I'd say that's the biggest number one issue that's facing Texas. And then obviously we have a bunch of others. I think, education is always important. I believe, personally, like I said, I believe that the role of government is to protect life from the womb to the grave. And so as long as we're not doing that, that's got to be a top issue, because that's the number one role of government, is to protect our right to life. So I'd say those are the big three. I think criminal justice reform is another big one. I think, again, the role of government is to protect our right to life, liberty, and property against violent aggression. And so I think nonviolent criminals get an unfair shake, and they, many times their lives are ruined because they make one mistake that didn't hurt anyone but themselves. And so I believe in giving these people a second chance, especially if they show a commitment to getting their life back on track, and that it truly was a mistake and not a pattern of criminal behavior. And so I think we need to look into that as well, especially my district is affected by that disproportionate relative to many other districts.
Okay, speaking of your district, it's gone back and forth. We had Republican representation, we've had Democrat representation. What's your sense about the district now? Is it trending, you think, either way in terms of more Democrat, more Republican? Are you going to have to bring over a lot of independent voters to win this? How's it going to work?
Yeah, so I think there, obviously, like in any district, there are pockets of strong support for each side. I actually think the Republican base is probably more energized than the Democratic base from what I've seen. I think it's also a little bit larger, but there's a very large group of more moderate swing independent voters in the district. And like in most suburban districts across the country in the age of Donald Trump, they're shifting blue. They have generally been repulsed by Trump, especially his rhetoric and some of the things he's done and said, especially in his personal side, which I can't fault him for that. I don't agree with everything Trump tweets. But at the same time, my role as the Republican nominee and as a candidate for this office is to communicate a message, the Republican message, that is, fiscal responsibility, first and foremost, the protection of liberty, the protection of life, protection of property, and how that it speaks to individuals. And as I get to know voters and get them to see me, I see that they, once they can look past the label and they just see every Republican is akin to whatever they see on the news, and they actually see me for who I am and what I stand for, and compare it with my opponent, we have tremendous appeal. And I think that, yes, we're going to have to win over a lot of voters that are probably not going to vote for Trump. I expect him to lose this district in November, but it doesn't mean that we can't win, certainly. And from what I've seen talking to voters, I see that there's very little connection to the incumbent, and a hunger and a desire for sincere leadership that is looking to serve the public and not serve, they're not looking for someone who's going to serve themselves. And that's what they've gotten from the current incumbent. And they're not going to get that from me. And they see that when they get to know me.
Well, I certainly love the resume you have. As we were talking about earlier, your West Point military service, life abroad, appreciating, anyone would come home after life abroad, living in Cairo, and your experience in military in Liberia, and just deeply appreciate the ideas of America and Texas. I always say Texas is what America is supposed to be. Texas really holds on to those founding ideas of America. So I would think it would just make you ready to roll, ready for the job at hand. And I do want one quick thing during this whole coronavirus shutdown. Is campaigning just come to a halt, or what can you do during the shutdown to campaign?
Well, we're not going to get too much into the what we're doing, but yeah, it certainly has made things more difficult for us. We're still trying to talk to voters as much as we can and trying to organize, but yeah, it's definitely made things challenging.
Oh, sure. I mean, things like this, I know other candidates are doing anything you can do on video, town halls, conversations, Zoom into a meeting. There's all sorts of ways you can talk to people that are compliant with I guess actually today's our big day. It's May 1st. But today's our day that the shelter in place, at least from the state level, is supposed to be over.
Yes,
So get back out and meet the world again. Okay. So
exactly.
if our listeners want to find your website, what is your website where they can go make a donation to support your campaign?
Yeah, it's samuelsmithfortexas.org. It's fully spelt out. So Samuel Smith, FOR, Texas.org.
Okay, and I just appreciate you taking the time. And for our listeners, I really hope you will go to his website. I hope you will take a look at all the information when you read about him. It's really, you're the kind of person people really wanted to have run for office, really from the founding of our country. People who are committed to the country, who've had business experience. You didn't just grow up in a political life and want to continue your family's political fame. You actually did things in your life that were outside of the political world. And now you're stepping up and running in a time of extreme challenges facing Texas and America. So I'm so glad you decided to run for office.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for talking to me. This again was Samuel Smith running for House District 107. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.